headlines on this Wednesday afternoon, July 27th. The International Monetary Fund has downgraded its 2022 growth outlook for the global economy to 3.2%, while sharing recession fears amid the rampant presence of risk factors. President Yoon is highlighting the need to nurture the country's biohealth industry in line with efforts to boost South Korea's economic strength and security. Also, health authorities here have announced a total of 100,285 new COVID-19 infections over the past 24 hours, the highest since April 20th, when the country posted over 111,000 cases. The global economy is standing on the brink of a rampant recession. Now, this is according to the International Monetary Fund, which has also downgraded its growth outlook for the world economy to 3.2% for this year. My colleague Ji has more on the IMF's pessimistic predictions.
Gloomy and more uncertain. That's how the International Monetary Fund described its latest World Economic Outlook report. The Washington-based institute cut its world GDP growth forecast for this year by 0.4 percentage points from its previous projection in April. Its new outlook is 3.2%. The chief economist at the IMF says with inflation expected to remain stubbornly high, the outlook has darkened significantly since April.
The world may soon be teetering on the edge of a global recession, only 2 years after the last one. Multilateral cooperation will be key in many areas, from climate transition and pandemic preparedness to food security and debt distress.
He says many of the downside risks that the fund identified in April are now materializing, adding that a number of shocks have crushed the global economy already weakened by the pandemic.
Higher than expected inflation, especially in the United States and major European economies, is triggering a tightening of global financial conditions. China's slowdown has been worse than anticipated amid COVID-19 outbreaks and lockdowns, and there have been further negative spillovers from the war in Ukraine.
The revision is mostly due to sizable projected markdowns for the world's largest economies. The U.S. economy is expected to grow by just 2.3% this year. That's 1.4 percentage points down from the previous forecast. The IMF said the cut reflects a series of drastic monetary tightening measures and a weaker than expected consumer spending, adding that the U.S. has a very low chance of avoiding a recession. China's outlook was lowered by 1.1 percentage points to 3.3%. The IMF said its calculation was based on the continued spread of financial stress in China's real estate sector and its COVID-19 lockdowns. Among the major economies, South Korea's downgrade was relatively small, a cut of 0.2 percentage point from the previous projection to 2.3%.
There was a smaller cut in the growth rates than other major economies like the US and China, because of South Korea's solid exports, including semiconductors.
Although not stated in the report, South Korea's finance ministry says the government's latest supplementary budget likely had a positive effect on the IMF's moderate revision. Ji, Arirang News.
And consumers here believe the inflation will soar higher in the months ahead. A July survey of some 2,500 households by the Bank of Korea shows an inflation rate prediction that is averaging 4.7% over the next 12 months. The forecast is 0.8 percentage point higher compared to the month prior and marks the highest on-month jump. Also, in reflection of the tough times, the central bank's composite consumer sentiment index in July stood at around 86, plunging by over 10 points on month. A figure below 100 means public prospects on the economy are more pessimistic than optimistic. And President Yoon has addressed ways to nurture the nation's biohealth industry in line with efforts to boost economic strength and security. During his weekly emergency economic talks, this time over in Gyeonggi-do province earlier on this Wednesday, President Yoon touched upon the matter with local health experts and business insiders. Talks range from greater support for R&D, for COVID-19 vaccines and treatments, to encouraging private investment by lifting bureaucratic red tape. South Korea has announced 100,285 new COVID-19 infections on this Wednesday. Now, this is the first time in about 100 days that the country's daily tally has surpassed the 100,000 mark. Authorities say the Omicron subvariant BA.5 is fueling the latest wave here on the local front, and that caseloads will continue to mount over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Social restrictions will not be reinstated, but related recommendations will be shared for high-risk facilities, mass gatherings, and inbound international travelers. U.S. President Joe Biden has applauded a fresh investment plan for the U.S. worth $22 billion by South Korea's SK Group. Our Shin Se-byuk reports.
South Korea's second-largest conglomerate, SK Group, on Tuesday unveiled an ambitious plan to inject billions of dollars in new investments in the United States and major industries, including chip production.
Today, we are announcing another $22 billion in new investment in the U.S., so including the major investment in semiconductor, the EV batteries, and biotechnology.
President Biden welcomed the announcement and called the investment historic, adding that it showcases that the U.S. is back to working with its allies. That, of course, includes South Korea.
Thank you for this historic announcement. This path-breaking announcement represents clear evidence that the United States, Korea, and its allies are back and winning the technology competition of the 21st century.
The remarks followed a virtual meeting between President Biden and SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won on Tuesday U.S. time, where they discussed boosting foreign investment in the U.S., especially in the chip industry, an area that has been at the center of Biden's policy agenda. The $22 billion announced on the day is part of a $52 billion package that the SK chairman said last year it planned to invest in the U.S. through 2030. Broken down by industry, of the $22 billion, $15 billion will go solely into the semiconductors, $5 billion will be invested in green energy businesses such as battery development, with the remainder for biotechnologies. Biden said with the latest investment plans in place, the U.S. can expect to add as many as 20,000 new jobs by 2025. Tuesday's announcement comes on top of the group's $7 billion investment plan made in May for new EV battery production facilities in the U.S. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Also on this Wednesday, South Korea honors UN forces who fought alongside the country's heroes during the Korean War. On this year's anniversary of the signing of the Korean War Armistice Agreement, South Korea marks UN forces Participation Day under the theme of We Go Together, with a message to the 22 participating countries. To take a listen.
We would not be able to talk about South Korea today if it were not for the UN sacrifice. Each Korean who enjoys freedom and prosperity today is indebted to 1,950,000 UN soldiers.
Meanwhile, the U.S. observes National Korean War Veterans Armistice Day on July 27th. A remembrance wall at the Korean War Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. will be unveiled on Wednesday with the names of some 43,000 servicemen who died during that war. Up next, we turn to Romania, where members of the Korean Red Cross are partaking in humanitarian efforts to ease the plight of Ukrainians seeking shelter beyond their own borders. I have Lee Han-gu live on the line. Han, it's been a while since we last spoke. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you again, Sunny, and watchers of Arirang News.
Right. Han, let's begin then with details about this latest mission to aid Ukrainian refugees by the Korean Red Cross.
Yes, with the Korean Red Cross here in Romania again, to monitor our ongoing collaborative project to support the people from Ukraine. Just let me briefly explain how the Korean Red Cross is supporting the people here in Romania. We are now supporting the operation of 3 community stores, which are providing kind of the necessary commodities, food, and the right information to the people from Ukraine. Additionally, on coming Friday, we will newly open the Intercultural Center at the headquarters of Romanian Red Cross in Bucharest, the capital city where the biggest number of the Ukrainian people is currently residing. It's the same. The center will provide kind of the integrated support to the people from Ukraine, such as right information, daily commodities and home meals, psychosocial support for the mental health, and first aid for the physical health, and some education program for the children.
Right, I see. Han, meanwhile, what can you tell us about the current challenges faced by Ukrainian refugees over there in Romania and perhaps in neighboring countries as well?
Actually, the development of crisis is really unpredictable until now. As you know, recently there were several attacks to the places had been relatively safe before these attacks. Due to these abnormal and unpredictable attacks, according to the Romanian Red Cross, there has been the increase of numbers crossing the border to the Romania. Adding to the unpredictability, extreme weather events, as your news already reported, is one of the biggest external threats to the people affected by the crisis. And also the time is not our side either. In case of a sudden onset crisis, it can be accordingly managed by the coordinated emergency relief of the humanitarian organization like Red Cross. But the longer-lasting crisis, like in this case, needs more systemic approach to build the local social system here. It may need a huge resource and the efforts rather than this emergency relief only. It's not only for the people affected by the crisis, it's also for the communities here in Romania.
Right, that of course is a very valid point, Han. Han, there has also been some media coverage in recent days about the danger of disinformation with regard to Ukrainian refugees. What have you been witnessing there in Romania?
Yeah, as a direct answer to your question, in Romania, honestly, I have not witnessed the negative impact of that disinformation, at least on the side of a Red Cross relief operation. But I fully understood the context behind this disinformation happening. Actually, in most of the population movement cases, there are some tensions behind the host communities and the people coming from outside. So I just want to remind you once again, the goal of the Red Cross relief operation is not just delivering goods and services to the people in need. The goal is to protect the lives and health of the people and ensure the dignified life of the people regardless of nationality, religious belief, ethnic, and so forth. What I'm saying this is based on this principled approach, or the Red Cross relief operation embed the social cohesion and the community engagement aspect. Simply just, for example, to avoid complaints from the local community about the reverse discrimination, and is the tension in between. We are also include the host community in our target criteria. So it's also same in the Korea. I think this principled, not the Korea, I'm sorry, in Romania. So this principled approach can be a solution, at least I think, to minimize the negative impact of this disinformation.
Right. And Han, finally, what more do you propose perhaps to keep the global helping hand in place for Ukrainian refugees as Russia's relentless assaults continue against their home country, that is?
Yeah, actually, that's one of my concerns. As time goes by, the eyes of the people can be taken away from this crisis very easily. But please do not forget that there are still people who are suffering from this crisis. Just remembering 70, 80 years ago, the Korean War in Korean Peninsula and Second World War in Europe, We were the people, actually. Now the people are us. We are all same. But for the practical information, in your busy days, it's very difficult to find out how to deliver your help and support to the people in need. In that case, please join the specialized humanitarian organization like Korean Red Cross. I think it's the best way. So if you are more interested in, please visit the website of the Korean Red Cross, 대한적 십자사, for more details.
All right, Han, thank you so much for making the time to join us live at this hour and for working to ease the plight of Ukrainian refugees there in Romania.
Thank you very much.
Right, and on that note, we end the first half of the Daily Report. We return in a little while with the second half. Stay with us.
Share South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduce a Korean New Year. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sex slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
So good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Forever.
Welcome back. On Viewpoint today, we assess the impact of high interest rates on ordinary people and their lives, especially South Korea's benchmark interest rate currently stands above that of the US. For more, I have Professor Choi Sang-yeop from Yonsei University here in the studio. Professor Choi, it's good to see you again.
Glad to be back here.
I also have Professor Oh Jun-seok at Sookmyung Women's University joining us live on the line. Professor Oh, it's good to have you on.
Good afternoon.
Right, Professor Che, South Korea's key interest rate stands at 2.25%, while that in the US stands at 1.75%. Simply speaking, what are the implications of South Korea possessing an interest rate that is perhaps stronger than that of the US?
Well, about 2 weeks ago, the Bank of Korea raised its policy rate by 50 basis points. So now its benchmark rate is higher than that of the Federal Reserve. So in principle, the monetary policy by the central bank affects the prices of all kinds of assets, especially for bonds. So given the inverse relationship between prices of the bond and its yields, all the interest rate went off after the meeting. So from an international investor's perspective, this indicates that investing in Korea gives a higher rate of returns than investing in the US if other things equal. So, which could result in capital inflows to Korea, especially in terms of portfolio bond investment. For the same reason, it also gives some room for the central bank to design its future monetary policy, because if the Korean benchmark rate is lower than that of the Federal Reserve, it will induce capital outflows for the same reason, which will have a depreciation pressure on the Korean currency. So weakening won will increase the imported prices, which will again increase inflation that is already high enough.
Right, it really is. Professor, BOK Governor Lee Chang-yong has said that this year's the country's base rate will hover between 2.75 and 3% by the end of this year. Can we assume that inflation here on the local front will be tamed with this rate range?
Thank you, Sunny. BOK's reference rate decision is influenced not only by local economic factors, but by international policy factors about the central bank's rate decision. I'd like to focus on economic factors. It is not likely to scale down inflationary pressure so long as Ukraine crisis continues, as interest rate changes are closely related to expected inflation. What the BOK Governor Lee Chang-yong commented is about when is the time inflation will peak. He explained in the sense that the peak will be reached late in the third quarter or early in the fourth quarter, and also price will remain high for some time, and then soft landing, declining gradually rather than falling abruptly. Moreover, he emphasized the core inflation has risen by over 4%. Here, the core inflation, not including such external factors as energy and food prices, is long-term inflation based upon the economic fundamentals. When it is too high, no wonder that the monetary policy board is responding preemptively before inflation escalates. What others the BOK government counted in was the internal economic factors of Korea, along with prolonged external uncertainties, industrial transformation, and restructuring of Korea would be expected in longer terms. In this respect, it might be possible to trigger a financing need and then affordable to bear beyond range over 3% base rate.
Right, I see. And Professor Che, staying with the broad impact of the BOK's benchmark interest rate, how do further rate hikes look to affect loans here on the local front?
Well, as I said earlier, an increase in the benchmark rate will increase all the other interest rate, including bank deposit and lending rate and mortgage rate and probably consumer credit rate. So in general, given the same size of increase in the benchmark rate, the pass-through will be higher for the loans if borrowers are perceived as risky. That being said, monetary policy tightening could have particularly adverse effects on loans towards the vulnerable, including low-income households and self-employees who is already suffering from the pandemic. So in this sense, monetary policy tightening could increase inequality, and that explains why the new government is trying to alleviate that burden of the vulnerable.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor, what is the impact of high interest rates on investments?
Interest hike generate a variety of impacts because interest rate in the capital market refers to cost of capital, not to mention our borrowing cost increase. When you get a loan, it takes the role of a hurdle rate. Investment project could be feasible only if the rate of return is greater than the hurdle rate. When the hurdle rate goes higher and higher, naturally it becomes more and more difficult to clear the hurdle. To fuel the survival, you can guess investment opportunities will be dwindled as a result. Interest rate hike is also interpreted as increasing marginal rate, the minimum guaranteed rate of return for investors. When the project need additional investment, you should have to have a cost-saving plan or restructuring plan in the project. Machine and robotics replaces labor. It's already going on. Service robot in a restaurant, assistance robot in the hospital, and the security robot in the factory. It is not strange when kiosk machine take orders. In brief, it starts a period of lean time and triggers the tide and belt public for many Koreans.
Right, I see. And staying with investments, Professor Che, do you propose then investments beyond Korea if the BOK's rate continues to stand above that of the US?
Well, I'm not really in a position to propose investment strategy, especially given my poor investment records. But let me just tell you some, general principle.
All right.
So it's true that the benchmark interest rate is one of the most important factors determining the asset prices and rate of return. But we should not only consider the present interest rate, but also its expected future path. So, So in this sense, according to last FOMC meeting and the forecast of market participants, the Federal Reserve is very likely to raise its rate by 75 basis points tonight, so which will make the interest rate differential between Korea and the US turn into negative, and I believe the gap between the two is going to become even larger toward the end of the year. And that's because a market consensus for the Fed's policy rate by the end of 2020 is slightly below 4%, but the same goes for around 3%, as Professor Oh already mentioned. So if interest rate reversal continues over time, it would provide even further depreciation pressure on won. So in this sense, having a dollar-denominated asset could be a good option for domestic investors. Of course, making a profit out of financial market is really difficult, and you have to move very quick. So in this sense, I strongly recommend you to pay a greater attention not only to interest rate differential, but also inflation differential. That's because, because of this ultra-accommodative monetary policy by most of central banks around the world, the interest rate gap, across the world is very narrow, like a, couple of percentage point at maximum, but inflation differential is like 5%, like 3%, which is much larger number. And eventually, this inflation differential will affect or determine the interest rate differential in the future.
Right, and I'm taking notes on that. Professor, moving beyond that then, I assume higher interest rates would reflect favorably on savings accounts. Do you care to elaborate?
Sunny, you raises a very good point. While some effect can be negative for consumers, for example, interest rate on your credit card balance may go up, a rate hike could have a positive impact on your savings account. But there is a catch of time lag. Even if the BOK boosts up its base rate, it will take a while to see that reflected in your bank account. As savers stashed away so much money during the pandemic, as of the bank don't need to compete with each other. A bank has enough money to allocate. As a matter of fact, we are more likely to experience the negative impact of a higher rate than the positive. What I mean, borrowing money from a bank will cost more and more. That could compound the inflation strain. Finance theory tells investing is another potential hedge against inflation. At time of higher interest rate, return are never guaranteed, as Professor Che commented, but there is the potential for higher gains than you can get otherwise. If you don't need money for more than 5 years, then investing could be a smart way of inflation hedging.
Right. Professor Che, how do you respond to concerns that continued interest rate hikes raises the risk of recession?
Well, in general, the central bank raised its policy rate for either because of rising inflation or because of too strong real side of the economy. And obviously, the current continued interest rate hike is driven by the first reason, not the second one. So in this sense, together with weakening economy, the continued continued rate hike will definitely increase the risk of recession, both in Korea and in the U.S. So in this sense, the BOK is in a very difficult environment. Given the strong dollar and monetary tightening in the U.S., to some extent, continued rate hike is like inevitable. But the problem is that monetary tightening alone is unlikely tame inflation unless the geopolitical risk surrounding Ukraine and Russia is alleviated. So adding to that, Korea is a small open economy which is heavily influenced by external factors such as global inflation or U.S. Economic condition, which is completely out of the BOK's control. So in this sense, unless the geopolitical risk is alleviated, there is nothing much they can do about inflation. But we still should trust our central bankers. So the central bank governor, Chang Yong-ri, who is one of the smartest people I ever met, and his excellent staff will do their job. And credibility of the central bank is a necessary condition for the successful monetary policy. And lastly, let me add to the risk of upcoming recession. So if you look at the housing market and the potential effects of monetary policy tightening on the housing market, we shouldn't forget that in Korea, a lion's share of mortgage loans is contracted in the variable term, not in fixed term. The number is about 80%, which makes mortgage interest rate very sensitive to changes in the monetary policy. So continued interest rate hike will increase the debt service cost of households who took on leverage, which will reduce their demand for housing and eventually housing prices. And given the fact that this housing value could be affecting your consumption, that will add to a downside risk for the possibility of recession in the near term.
Right, unfortunately, of course. Professor, the U.S. Federal Reserve, as Professor Che has mentioned, is holding its July meeting on this Wednesday local time. Now, most believe a 75 basis point increase will be announced, while a few are predicting a 100 basis point hike. What are your prospects?
I suppose 75 BP hike as a preemptive measures to tackle the inflation could be better, so long as the labor market and consumer spending hold constant and strong. But 100% BP hike at one time can hardly be imagined. That is because interest rate hike in an economy seems like pressing the brake pedal when you drive a car from the top down to the foothill. Here, the speed of the car is inflationary pressure. According to the survey of American economists, it is forecast that the Fed will raise raise rate by another 25 basis points in early 2023, reaching a peak of 3.75% before pausing and starting to cut rates before the end of the year. The year-end forecast for the Fed fund rate is now 3.4%, well up from 1.9% in March, and now generally in line with market expectation. It is it is expected after peaking at 3.75% next year, and then the rate will begin falling again, ending 2024 back below 3.5% and 2.5% after longer terms.
Right, hopefully that will be the case. All right, Professor, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Professor Che here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over in the Alps, glaciers that are reportedly melting at an alarming pace as brutal heat waves take their toll on this range of mountains in Europe. Arirang has more on this unsettling reality.
Blistering heat waves in Europe have claimed lives and destroyed land. And now, high temperatures are melting glaciers in the Alps at a record pace. According to data reported by Reuters, glaciers are melting at rates unseen in at least 60 years of record-keeping. Over at the Swiss Motorrach Glacier, 2 meters of mass melted away midway through the summer. On average, the glacier sees a seasonal melt of 1 meter annually.
So at the first stake we measured, we had about 2 meters of melt. and the most extreme year since we have been measuring was 1 meter per year. So we have already melt of 2 meters, and it's midway of summer.
He added the depth of the snow and packed ice has thinned by up to more than 180 meters, and losses have been so significant that the change has already been seen on the tourist maps depicting the glacier. But it's not just the Swiss Alps that's seeing record melting. Glaciologists in Austria, France, and Italy have also confirmed that glaciers there were on track for record losses. While most of the world's mountain glaciers are retreating due to climate change, experts say the European Alps are especially vulnerable because they're smaller with relatively little ice cover. Not to mention, temperatures in the Alps are warming around twice as fast compared to the global average. It also didn't help that the winter of 2021 saw very little snow. While the vanishing glaciers are already endangering lives, Swiss citizens are also concerned about the effect on their economy. Some of the ski resorts in the region, which rely on these glaciers, are now covering them with white sheets to reflect sunlight and reduce melting. And there are fears that things may get worse. Studies show that alpine glaciers are expected to lose more than 80% of their current mass by 2100 if greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise. 이승재, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, here on the local front, a new investment plan is taking shape among Koreans. The trading of plants for pleasure and for profit. Our Shin Ha-young has more on this fresh venture.
People in South Korea have been looking for other ways to make money with consumer prices rising and the stock market heading down. They're buying certain types of houseplants and reselling them, a practice they call plant tech.
1.5 million Korean won, or about 1,140 US dollars. That's the price of this popular and unique Monstera variegata plants that I'm holding right now. These days, more people are getting into plants not just as a hobby, but also in search of profits.
Plants like Quinanthurium go for up to 1,900 US dollars, while the vine known as Mini Monstera can sell for up to $2,300. Then what makes these plants so valuable?
The high-value ones are the ones with leaves that are variegated, that is, they have patterns on their leaves. They aren't easy to grow, so demand for them is rising while the supply is limited.
People in different age groups are seeking out rare plants for different reasons.
I got interested in rare plants after seeing them on YouTube. For my birthday, I want to get a philodendron white princess and an elephant ear. It will be fun to take care of them when I get stressed out.
Another shopper said she was looking for a new hobby she could use to make some money on the side.
A healthy audible Monstera plant takes a month to grow a new leaf. I'll be looking forward to these new and unpredictable patterns. It's like killing two birds with one stone because I can clone the plant with trimmings and sell the new plants online.
The rising popularity of plant tech can be seen in other industries as well. According to one of the biggest Korean bookstores, sales of books about plants jumped more than 30% last year from the year before, and so far this year, they've risen about 17%. The Korea Invention Promotion Association forecasts that the Korea's market for indoor plant cultivation will expand to $58 million US by next year. One expert says this phenomenon is the result of people's interest in scarcity as a source of value.
As with cryptocurrency, the value comes from scarcity. The value of a thing rises when people are interested in it, and these factors make plant tech a way to invest.
Though investing in plants has relatively low barriers to entry, because plants take skills to grow, it's important to not only understand the trend of the market, but also to learn about the plants themselves. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
South Korea's high-tech lifestyle is evident upon arrival at Incheon International Airport, where robots seek to guide you to your gate or even a restaurant. Our Yoon was there.
Hello, my name is Airstar. Please touch my screen or say my name if you need assistance.
This is Airstar, the first robot of its kind in the world to work at an airport.
Airstar's main job is to escort passengers to their check-in counters or departure gates. It can speak and understand 4 languages: Korean, Chinese, English, and Japanese. Let's give it a try.
Press the start button or...
Take me to gate 14.
Yes, I'll start the guidance now. You can follow me.
Airstar can be found at South Korea's largest airport. And since being launched in 2018, Airstar has been of service at least 1,000 times per day. It's not only a great communicator with a range of emotions, but also a great driver, using sensors to avoid obstacles and match the average walking speed of passengers. The latest robot to join the team is AirDilly, a delivery robot that brings your food or beverage to where you're seated or near your boarding gate. All people need to do is scan the relevant QR code assigned to their seat or gate number. Then AirDilly will be on its way. It can deliver to the farthest gate in the terminal, around 250 meters away from the cafes and bakeries. It has 2 cabinets to store the orders and can carry up to 17 kilograms.
Yeah, I think it's great. It allows you to relax and sit down without having to rush around. The app was easy to use and just let the drinks come to you.
With the vision of becoming a smarter airport, Incheon International Airport has been expanding its robot staff. They all have distinctive functions. Quarantine Bot has been deployed to stop the spread of COVID-19. It checks the temperatures of travelers who have just arrived in Korea and monitors whether people comply with antivirus measures, mainly the wearing of masks. AirRide, for instance, takes passengers around the airport without a driver. Incheon International Airport says more digital projects are in the pipeline.
We realize cutting-edge technology boosts convenience for passengers. So by 2025, we will expand the number of robots and widen their functions. By next year, we're hoping to officially kick off unmanned self-driving shuttle bus services.
Incheon International Airport is where travelers can get their first taste of tech-savvy South Korea, and there's even more digital projects yet to come. In 2 years' time, we may be seeing a smart boarding system that uses facial recognition technology to shorten the check-in process. 신예은, Arirang News.
South Korea is looking ahead to becoming a multicultural society in the near future. That being said, my colleague Song Yoo-jin took the streets of Seoul to see what life is like here for our foreign neighbors. To take a look.
2 million. Accounting for almost 5% of the population, that's the number of foreign residents living in South Korea. The figure had been steadily rising, but dropped during the pandemic. Now it's rebounding again and is expected to grow.
In 5 years, the number of foreign residents will reach 3 million, and in the long run will make up 10% of the population. Every year, South Korea's economically active population declines by 300 to 500,000. Attracting more foreigners will help solve this labor shortage and population decline.
But starting a new life in a brand new country isn't easy. The biggest obstacles are language and social perception.
I live in Dobonggu, and there a lot of people don't speak English.
If in the subway, all the people look at me like how she's foreigner.
It's even harder if you're planning to stay long-term.
I've never seen a person who moved here because the Korean society is welcoming. It's been really exclusive to foreigners as it has a long history of cultural ethnic homogeneity.
Then what kind of efforts are being made in South Korea to help foreign residents adapt to the country? One of them is the Justice Ministry's Korea Immigration and Integration Program. Designated institutions offer free classes to help foreigners become self-reliant members of society.
The program has 7 levels. Korean language is taught from level 0 to 4, and those who complete level 4 have no problem communicating in Korean. Levels 5 and 6 teach Korean culture and society. Students can apply for permanent residency after level 5 and naturalization after level 6.
But there's still room for improvement.
When I first came to Korea in the early 2000s, there were very few foreigners living here, so there were barely any relevant laws or policies. It's been less than 2 decades since they started developing them, so right now they're too complicated and all over the place.
To solve this, the government is pushing to launch an immigration agency.
There's no single designated body that's in charge of immigration and foreign resident-related affairs. Installing an agency that's solely in charge will not only increase the efficiency of the immigration and visa process, but also help the country attract more foreign talent into the country.
With South Korea looking to become a more multicultural society, relevant efforts should be made to embrace and support those who come here. 송유진, Arirang News.
Seoul City and the country's Incheon Group are taking on the role of Good Samaritan. Some $4.1 million worth of daily necessities, including soap, shampoo and detergent, will be donated to low-income households as well as welfare centres. Now, details of the planned donation have yet to be disclosed, but it does mark the largest such aid for vulnerable people by the cosmetics to healthcare conglomerate since it began the campaign 10 years ago.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Europe, EU ministers have agreed to cut their reliance on Russian gas supplies. EU energy ministers on Tuesday agreed to an emergency plan to reduce gas demand and store enough supplies for the upcoming winter. From August until the end of March 2023, all member countries will work toward reducing gas consumption by a voluntary 15%. This comes as the region braces for further supply cuts from Russia starting Wednesday, when the Nord Stream 1 pipeline will only run at 20% capacity. The EU's gas rationing plan exempts some countries not connected to the EU's gas or electricity networks. At least 15 people have been killed in violent protests against the United Nations in the Democratic Republic of Congo. According to local authorities on Tuesday, 3 UN peacekeepers and 12 civilians have died since protests began on Monday. The violent protests started in the eastern city of Goma and spread to the neighboring city of Butembo. Hundreds of protesters ransacked UN buildings, and the UN peacekeepers have been accused of retaliating with force. The protests follow complaints that the UN has failed to protect civilians against militia violence. Armed rebel groups in the eastern part of the country have massacred civilians, and conflicts there have displaced millions of people. Russia is set to quit the International Space Station after 2024 and will work on building a space station of its own. This is according to an announcement by Russia's new space chief Yuri Borisov on Tuesday. Experts say Russia's absence will complicate operation of the 24-year-old space station, which had been hoped to continue running until 2030. Meanwhile, NASA said it hadn't received any official notice of Russia's intention to quit. This comes amid prolonged tension between the West and Russia due to the war in Ukraine. The ISS had long been seen as a symbol of Washington-Moscow cooperation in the post-Cold War world. The space jacket worn by American astronaut Buzz Aldrin on the Apollo 11 mission has been sold for $2.77 million. The jacket went under the hammer at Sotheby's in New York on Tuesday. Bidders contested for 10 minutes before the winning bid was made. Sotheby's global head of science and popular culture says the jacket is the only garment on sale from the 1969 mission that saw man first step foot on the moon. Some of Aldrin's other possessions will soon be auctioned, including his Medal of Honor, a flag, and the pen that supposedly saved his and Neil Armstrong's lives while traveling in the lunar module. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Wednesday afternoon. It's just as hot as yesterday, as a prolonged heat wave is affecting the country. Now, with nationwide heat advisories in place, Seoul is reaching 32 degrees and Daegu 33 degrees. So please take necessary steps to keep yourself cool. And overall, it's going to be sunny, but there's a chance of showers in central regions and Gyeongsang-Bukdo province. The amount will be rather small, 5 to 20 millimeters, but could be accompanied by stormy conditions. So bring your umbrella if you're out and about. And the UV index and ozone levels are going to be high across the country. And ground-level ozone can trigger a variety of health problems, especially for those who have conditions that affect the lungs, such as asthma. So staying indoors and refraining from outdoor activities in the afternoon might be your best option. And stifling heat will be persistent throughout the week with frequent showers in store. Now, let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
And that ends Wednesday's edition of the Daily Report. We'll be back with more coverage tomorrow. Join us then. Thank you for now.
망가져요? 구겨져요 신발 날아가요 요리 튕겨요